I always believed that my father's biggest priority was our family's honor. We were taught that money was just a tool for the ministry. But last night, inside a locked safe in the basement of the big house, I found a document that proved my entire childhood was a curated lie, a legal contract from 1994 with a $20 million price tag. This wasn't just a business deal. It was a trade. I found a birth certificate for a baby girl born in April 1994, a sister I never knew I had, and right next to it, a bank transfer showing $20 million sent to an anonymous estate in Arkansas. My father didn't just hide a child, he bought her silence before she could even speak. For 30 years, we've stood in family photos, smiling for the cameras, while our own flesh and blood was living in the shadows, paid to stay away. I confronted him this morning, and the look in his eyes told me everything. He's not afraid of the truth. He's afraid of losing the empire he built on that girl's disappearance. My name is Jessa Seawold. Today, I'm not just a daughter, I'm a witness. Over the next hour, I'm going to show you the wire transfers, the hidden birth records, and the secret location where my sister has been kept for 3 decades. The Duggar legacy is crumbling, and it's time to bring the 20th child home. I remember the smell of the attic in the big house. It's a mix of old cedar, dust, and secrets. For years, we were told never to go into the far corner past the old film equipment from the early TLC days. My father always said it was just business records, boring tax papers that no one needed to see. But after the recent legal battles involving Josh, I started to wonder, what else was he hiding to protect the family name? It was 200 a.m. Ben and the kids were asleep. I used my old key to the main house. The floorboards groaned under my feet like they were trying to warn me. I finally reached the locked metal filing cabinet. It wasn't a standard key. It was a heavy, old-fashioned deadbolt. When I finally forced it open, I didn't find tax returns. I found a leather-bound journal and a single, pristine white envelope marked with a date, April 14th, 1994. My heart was pounding in my ears. In 1994, my mother was supposed to be recovering from a difficult season. We were a smaller family then, still struggling to make ends meet. But inside that envelope was a bank statement from a private trust. It showed an initial deposit of $5 million, which had grown over 30 years of investments to over $20 million. But the account wasn't for the 19 of us. It was specifically designated for someone named Child 20. Beneath the bank statement lay the piece of paper that changed my life forever. It was a birth certificate from a small, private clinic in rural Arkansas, a place our family never frequented. The mother's name was blurred, intentionally smudged with ink, but the father's signature, I've seen that signature on every permission slip, every contract, and every Bible I own. It was Jim Bob Duggar. The date of birth matched the bank deposit. April 1994, I sat there on the cold attic floor, staring at the name of the child, Faith Hope Duggar. A sister, a 21st child? No, a 20th child who came before Josie, before Jubilee. A sister who was never mentioned in our prayers, never shown in our home movies, and never included in our family count. Why would a man who prides himself on multiplying and valuing every life erase a daughter from existence? Then I saw the second document. It was a non-disclosure and relinquishment agreement. It stated that in exchange for the setup of a $5 million trust, the biological mother and the child would relocate permanently outside of the United States and never make contact with the Duggar family or the IBLP ministry. It was a payoff. My father didn't just have a secret child, he used the ministry's early influence to buy her disappearance. As I sat there, memories started coming back. I remembered a woman who used to help with the laundry in the early 90s. She was young, quiet, and always looked frightened when my father entered the room. Then, one day, she was just gone. We were told she moved back to her family. We were children. We didn't ask questions. We trusted our leaders. We trusted our father. But looking at this $20 million figure, I realized the cost of that trust. While we were living in a cramped house, sharing shoes and eating canned goods, my father was managing a multi-million-dollar silence. He was terrified, not of the sin, but of the scandal. If the world knew the perfect patriarch had a child out of wedlock, the empire would have crumbled before it even began. I took photos of every page. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. This wasn't just about a secret sister anymore. This was about a massive financial fraud involving church funds and the betrayal of 19 siblings who were told we were all he had. I left the attic as the sun began to rise, knowing that by the end of this week, the world would finally know the name Faith Hope Duggar, and I would be the one to find her. I couldn't just sit on this information. The image of that name, Faith Hope Duggar, was burned into my mind. But more than that, the number kept screaming at me, $20 million. Where does a family that started with nothing, a family that preached debt, free living, and frugality, find $20 million to hide a single human being? I spent the next 48 hours in a dark room with my laptop, digging through public records and tax filings that I wasn't supposed to see. That's when I found it. A shell company registered in the Cayman Islands called GMP Holdings. In our family circles, GMP always stood for grace and peace, a common greeting in the ministry. But in the world of high finance, it was a black hole. Between 1996 and 2012, millions of dollars from TLC contracts and private ministry donations were funneled into GMP Holdings. It wasn't going to missions. It wasn't going to the IBLP. It was being laundered to fund the life of a girl who didn't exist to the public. I traced a series of wire transfers that led directly to a high-end private estate in Geneva, Switzerland. The payments were categorized as educational grants, but the student listed on the grants didn't have a last name. She was only identified as Subject F. My father wasn't just paying for her to stay away, he was managing her entire life from 10,000 miles away, using the very money we earned as children on that television show. I realized then that my father couldn't have done this alone. To move that kind of money across borders without the IRS noticing requires help. Professional help. I started looking into the names on the board of G&P Holdings. I expected to see familiar faces from the ministry, but instead, I found high-powered lawyers from Little Rock and a Swiss banker who had been a family friend for decades. People who sat at our dinner table, smiled at us, and patted us on the head, all while knowing there was a sister suffering in exile. I found an email chain from 2004, right when 17 kids and counting was taking off. The lawyers were panicked. They told my father that if the public found out about the Switzerland situation, the show would be canceled immediately. My father's response was chilling. He wrote back, "The cost of silence is high, but the cost of the truth is our destruction. Increase the monthly allowance. Make sure she knows that coming to Arkansas is not an option." The coldness of that sentence broke my heart. He didn't say, "I miss her." He didn't say, "Is she okay?" He treated my sister like a ticking time bomb that needed to be managed with cash. While we were being filmed for our purity and wholesome values, my father was negotiating the price of a human soul to keep his television empire alive. The hypocrisy was deeper than I ever imagined. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't confront my father yet. He would just lock the files and move the money again. I needed to see a Subject F for myself. I used some of my own savings, money I had kept separate from the family trust, and booked a flight to Geneva. I didn't tell Ben the whole truth. I just told him I needed time to pray and clear my head. But as I sat on that plane, looking out at the clouds, I felt like I was finally waking up from a 30-year sleep. I arrived at the address listed in the Geneva files. It wasn't a school. It was a secluded villa surrounded by high stone walls and security cameras. I stood outside that gate for 3 hours, wondering if the girl inside even knew she had 19 siblings in America. Did she know her father was a famous man of God, or had she been told that her family was dead? Just as I was about to walk away, the gate opened. A silver car pulled out, and for a split second, The window was down. I saw a profile, a young woman in her late 20s. She had the same chin as my sister Jinger, the same high forehead as my mother. She looked so much like us that it made me nauseous. She was a Duggar in every sense, except for the one that mattered. She was a secret. I realized then that the $20 million wasn't a gift for her. It was a cage. And I was there to break the bars. I followed that silver car for 20 minutes through the winding streets of Geneva. My heart was racing so fast, I felt lightheaded. Finally, the car pulled up to a small, quiet cafe near the lake. The woman stepped out. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. She moved just like Jana, steady and careful. I followed her inside, my legs feeling like lead. I sat 2 tables away, watching her order a coffee in perfect French, a language none of us were ever taught to speak. I waited until she was settled, then I walked over. My voice was a whisper. I said, "Excuse me, are you Faith?" She froze. Her cup clattered against the saucer. She didn't look up at me with confusion. She looked up with terror. She knew that name, a name my father had forbidden her from using. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face, and then she whispered back, "You're Jessa. You're the one from the magazines." In that moment, the wall of $20 million came crashing down. She knew who we were. She had been watching us from across the ocean for years. She told me she had a secret scrapbook filled with clippings of our weddings, our births, and our scandals. While we didn't know she existed, she had lived her entire life as a ghost in our shadow, forbidden from ever reaching out. The pain in her voice was a kind of suffering I had never encountered in all my years in the ministry. We talked for hours in that corner of the cafe. Faith told me the terms of the agreement my father forced her mother to sign. It wasn't just about moving away. It was a total erasure of identity. She was raised under a false surname. Every year on her birthday, a lawyer would visit her to remind her that if she ever contacted a Duggar, her mother's medical trust, the money keeping her sick mother alive in a private clinic, would be cut off instantly. My father wasn't just using $20 million to hide a child. He was using it as a weapon to hold a daughter hostage. Faith told me that she once tried to write me a letter when I got married. She had the envelope addressed and stamped, but the security team my father paid for intercepted it. She was told that if she tried again, her mother would be moved to a state facility. Jim Bob didn't just buy her silence, he bought her fear. As she spoke, I realized the depth of the cruelty. We were taught that children are a blessing from the Lord, but to Jim Bob Duggar, this blessing was a liability that needed to be liquidated. Faith showed me a photo of her mother, the woman from our laundry room in the 90s. She looked so thin, so broken. She had been living in a golden cage, paid for by the very fans who thought they were supporting a godly family. I felt a wave of shame so deep I couldn't look Faith in the eye. Then, Faith told me the most shocking part. The $20 million wasn't just sitting in a bank. It was being used to fund a secondary shadow ministry, a group of people dedicated to keeping the secrets of powerful men in the IBLP. My father wasn't the only one with a secret family. There was a whole network of hidden children across Europe and South America, all funded by the same shell companies. Faith looked at me and said, "Jessa, your father isn't afraid of me. He's afraid of the others. If I speak, the whole system falls." I realized then that I wasn't just looking for a sister. I had stumbled into a global conspiracy of silence. My father was a kingpin in a world of moral bankruptcy. I took her hand. It was the first time I had ever touched my sister, and I made a promise. I told her, "I don't care about the money. I don't care about the show. I'm taking you home." But as we walked out of the cafe, I noticed a dark SUV parked across the street. The windows were tinted. It had been following us. My father's security wasn't just in Switzerland to protect Faith. They were there to watch her. And now they were watching me. I knew that the moment I stepped back on American soil, my life would never be the same. The battle for the 20th child had truly begun. And this time, the truth was going to cost much more than $20 million. The moment we left that cafe, the air felt different. Cold. Heavy. I've lived my whole life under the gaze of cameras, so I know when I'm being watched. That dark SUV didn't just follow us. It sat there like a predator. Faith's hand was trembling in mine. She whispered, "Jessa, they've never let me leave the city limits. If they see us heading for the airport, they'll stop us." I realized then that my father's protection was actually a prison. We didn't go back to her villa. I knew the security there would have already alerted Arkansas. My father has eyes everywhere. We ducked into a crowded shopping mall, weaving through the tourists. I felt like a fugitive in a movie, but this was my life. I had to get Faith out of Switzerland before the lawyers could freeze her mother's medical care, or worse, before they could move Faith to another safe house where I'd never find her again. I bought 2 burner phones and a change of clothes for both of us. As I stood in that restroom stall, changing out of my recognizable sweater, I looked at my reflection. I wasn't the perfect Duggar daughter anymore. I was a woman stealing a sister back from a man who thought he owned her. I sent a cryptic text to Ben, "Don't call. Just pray. I'm bringing someone home." I knew the moment I hit send, our life in Arkansas was over. We avoided the Geneva airport. I knew my father's connections would have the passenger manifests flagged. Instead, we took a taxi to the train station and bought tickets for Lyon, France. As the train pulled out of the station, I saw 2 men in dark suits standing on the platform, talking frantically into their radios. One of them looked exactly like the head of security Jim Bob used to hire for our public events. They were so close. Just a pane of glass separated us from the life my father had built for us. Faith sat across from me, staring out at the dark Swiss countryside. She told me about the letters she used to write us. Every birthday, every Christmas, she would write 19 letters. She'd tell us about her school, her dreams of becoming a nurse, her favorite Bible verses. And every year, the lawyers would take them and burn them in front of her. They told her it was for our spiritual protection, that we were too pure to know about a child of sin like her. The cruelty of it made me sick. My father used God's name to justify burning a child's love. He used our purity as a cage for her. Faith looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked, "Does he really love the Lord, Jessa, or does he just love the power?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the $20 million in that trust fund was stained with the tears of a girl who just wanted a family. I promised her right then, "You won't have to write letters anymore. You're going to speak to them yourself." Near the border, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. It wasn't my father, it was his lead attorney, a man I've known since I was 5 years old. His voice was cold, devoid of any Christian warmth. He said, "Jessa, turn around. You are interfering with a legal settlement. If you cross that border with her, the trust fund is dissolved. Her mother's clinic in Geneva will stop treatment by morning. Do you want that on your conscience?" I felt the air leave my lungs. This was my father's ultimate move. He wasn't threatening me. He was threatening a sick woman's life to keep his secret safe. He was using a grandmother's health to blackmail his own daughter. I looked at Faith. She saw the look on my face. She took the phone from my hand, her voice steady and brave for the first time. She said, "I tell my father that I'd rather be poor and free than rich and hidden. And tell him Jessa isn't the one he should be afraid of. It's the truth." She hung up. We crossed into France 20 minutes later. But the victory felt hollow. I knew my father would retaliate. By the time we reached Paris to fly to America, the news would be out. Not the truth, but his version of it. I realized that to save Faith, I was going to have to burn down the entire Duggar empire. I opened my laptop and started uploading the photos I took in the attic to a secure cloud drive. If we didn't make it home, at least the evidence would. The 20M secret was about to go global. The flight from Paris to JFK was the longest 8 hours of my life. Every time a flight attendant walked by, I flinched. I kept imagining my father's lawyers calling the airline, trying to divert the plane, or having us detained the moment we touched the ground. Faith sat next to me, clutching the armrest so hard her knuckles were white. She hadn't seen America since she was a toddler. To her, this wasn't a homecoming. It was a leap into a lion's den. I turned on my phone the moment the wheels hit the tarmac. My screen exploded. 300 missed calls, thousands of texts, but it wasn't just family. The news had leaked, but not the way I expected. A tabloid headline was already trending. Jessa Sewald involved in international kidnapping plot. My father hadn't waited for me to speak. He had launched a preemptive strike. He was painting me as a mentally unstable daughter who had abducted a vulnerable woman from Switzerland. He was using his media connections to turn my own audience against me before I could even clear customs. I looked at Faith and saw the headline on her phone too. Tears started rolling down her face. She whispered, "He's doing it again, Jessa. He's making me disappear by making me a victim." In that moment, I realized the $20 million wasn't just for her silence. It was a war chest for her character assassination. We weren't even off the plane yet, and the Duggar machine was already trying to grind us into the dirt. As we walked toward the customs hall, I saw them, 2 men in suits, standing right next to the port authority officers. I recognized one of them, Jim Bob's private investigator. He wasn't there to welcome us, he was there to take Faith. He stepped forward, a fake plastic smile on his face, and said, "Jessa, your father is very worried. We have a private car waiting to take this young lady to a safe location. You've been under a lot of stress, and he wants to handle this quietly." The quietly part sent a chill down my spine. I stepped in front of Faith, my heart pounding against my ribs. I looked the investigator in the eye and said, "She is an American citizen. She is an adult, and she is my sister. If you touch her, I will scream loud enough for every news camera in this airport to hear me." The officers nearby looked confused. They didn't know they were standing in the middle of a 30-year family cover. The investigator's smile vanished. He leaned in and whispered, "Think about your children, Jessa. Think about Ben's reputation. This doesn't have to be ugly." That was the threat I was waiting for. He was using my own family as leverage, but they underestimated me. I pulled out my phone and started a live stream. Within seconds, 10,000 people were watching. I turned the camera on the investigator and said to the world, "This man is trying to take my sister away. Her name is Faith, and my father has hidden her for 30 years. The investigator backed off immediately. He knew my father's greatest fear wasn't God. It was a camera he couldn't control. He managed to slip away into a taxi while the security team scrambled to call Arkansas. I didn't go to my house. I didn't go to any of my siblings' homes. I knew they were all being watched, or worse, being pressured by my father to talk sense into me. Instead, I drove to a small rental house in a town 2 hours away, booked under a friend's name. For the first time in 3 days, we could breathe. But the silence was terrifying. Faith sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the American flag on a neighbor's porch. She asked me, "Why does he hate me so much?" Jess and I sat beside her and told her the truth. "He doesn't hate you, Faith. He's terrified of you, because you are the living proof that his perfect life was a lie. You are the $20 million mistake he couldn't pray away." I realized then that the money wasn't just in Switzerland anymore. My father had been moving funds back into the US to prepare for a legal battle. He was ready to spend every cent of that $20 million to make sure Faith never stepped foot in the big house. As the sun went down, I opened the files I had stolen from the attic one more time. I found a final page I hadn't seen before. It was a list of names, not just Faith's. There were 5 other names, 5 other accounts. The Twin Utter M secret was just the tip of the iceberg. My father wasn't just hiding a daughter. He was running a hidden empire of disposable family members. I looked at Faith and said, "Tomorrow, we aren't just going to court. We're going to the one place my father can't hide the pulpit." The real storm was about to break. I thought the hardest part was getting Faith to America. I was wrong. The hardest part was the sound of my phone ringing the next morning. It wasn't the lawyers this time. It was my sister's. Jana was the first to call. Her voice was trembling, a side of her I rarely see. She didn't ask if I was okay. She asked, "Jessa, what have you done?" "Papa is devastated. He says you're trying to destroy everything we've built for the Lord." I looked at Faith, who was sitting across the room, and I realized that to my siblings, she wasn't a sister yet. She was a threat. Then came the group chat. For years, our sibling group chat was a place of baby photos and prayer requests. Now, it was a battlefield. Some were silent, too afraid to pick a side, but others, led by the brothers who still depend on my father's payroll, were vicious. They accused me of being bitter and seeking fame. They said the $20 million was a private family matter and that I had no right to dig up the past. It felt like a knife in my heart. My own flesh and blood were choosing the image of a perfect family over the life of a real sister. I sent one photo to the group, a photo of the 1994 birth certificate. I typed, "Her name is Faith. She is our sister. She has been alone for 30 years while we played for the cameras. Is this what godly looks like to you?" The chat went dead silent for 10 minutes. Then 2 people left the group. The house was divided and the foundation was crumbling, but then the private messages started coming. My phone buzzed with a notification from Jill. She didn't say much, just, "I'm with you. We're coming to your location. Don't go anywhere." A few minutes later, a message from Jinger in California. "I've always felt like something was missing. Thank you for finding her, Jessa." Slowly, the lines were being drawn. It wasn't just me against my father anymore. It was the sisters who had found their voices against the system that tried to keep us quiet. Jill arrived at the safe house 3 hours later. When she saw Faith, she didn't ask for a DNA test. She didn't ask about the $20 million. She just walked up and hugged her for a long, long time. They both cried. Jill whispered, "I'm so sorry we didn't look for you sooner." In that small living room, for the first time in 30 years, 3 Duggar daughters sat together without a chaperone, without a camera, and without my father's permission. It was the most godly moment I had ever experienced. But the joy was short-lived. Jill told me that Jim Bob was holding an emergency meeting at the big house. He was telling the younger kids that Faith was a scammer and that I had been brainwashed by worldly influences. He was even threatening to cut off the trust funds of any sibling who spoke to me. He was using the same $20 million to buy the loyalty of my brothers that he had used to buy the silence of my sister. He was turned our family into a marketplace of souls. That evening, my father finally called me. Not from his office, but from his personal cell. His voice wasn't angry. It was that calm, paternal tone he used when he was about to deliver an ultimatum. He said, "Jessa, I forgive you for your rebellion. I'm prepared to double your inheritance and give you the deed to the property you've always wanted. All you have to do is take Faith back to the airport. We will tell the public it was a misunderstanding, a hoax. We can fix this, Jessa. Just come home." I looked at Faith, who was laughing for the first time as she talked to Jill. I looked at the documents on the table that proved my father had lied to us for decades. I said, "Papa, you can't buy me. You already spent $20 million trying to buy the truth, and look where it got you. I'm not coming home. I'm bringing the home to you. We're coming to the big house tomorrow, and we're bringing the press." He hung up without a word. I knew what that silence meant. It meant war. He was going to call in every favor, every lawyer, and every influential person in the IBLP to stop us. But as I looked at my sisters, I realized we weren't the little girls who had to hide in the laundry room anymore. We were women with the truth. As I prepared for the drive back to Town, I realized the 2020 Trust Fund wasn't my father's greatest asset. His greatest asset was our fear, and I wasn't afraid anymore. The 21st child was going to meet her father, and the world was going to watch. The drive to Town felt like a funeral procession. As the familiar gates of the big house came into view, my stomach did a slow flip. For years, these gates represented safety and family. Today, they looked like the bars of a prison. I could see the security cameras swiveling toward my car. My father had already reinforced the perimeter. There were 3 black SUVs parked in the driveway, his legal team and his private security. He wasn't waiting for a daughter. He was waiting for an enemy? Faith sat in the back seat, her face pale, staring at the massive house she had only seen in grainy tabloid photos. She whispered, "Jessa, maybe we shouldn't do this. He has everything. We only have the truth." I reached back and squeezed her hand. I told her, in this family, the truth is the only thing he could never afford to buy. I pulled the car right up to the front door, ignoring the security guard waving me off. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't wait for an invite. I walked up to the front door of the house my childhood built and I pushed it open. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. The air felt thick with tension. I could hear the hum of the industrial air conditioner and the ticking of the large clock in the hallway. Then I heard a chair scrape in the kitchen. My father's office door opened slowly. He didn't come out smiling, and he didn't have his TV personality on. He looked older, colder, and more desperate than I had ever seen him. He looked at me, then his eyes shifted to Faith. For the first time in 30 years, the patriarch of the Duggar family was looking at his greatest secret. We stood in the kitchen, the heart of our family life. My father didn't speak to Faith. He looked at me and said, "You've brought a stranger into our home, Jessa. You've brought shame to your mother and your siblings. Is this the honor we taught you?" I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag and threw the 1984 documents on the granite countertop. The paper slid across the stone and stopped right in front of him. I said, "Is she a stranger, Papa? Or is she the $20 million secret you've been paying to hide since the day she was born?" He didn't even look at the papers. He knew what was on them. He leaned over the counter, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. "That money was a gift, Jessa. It was to ensure she had a life better than what she deserved. I protected this family from a scandal that would have destroyed all of you. Every meal you ate, every dress you wore on that show, was possible because I kept the world from seeing our flaws. I did it for you." It was the ultimate narcissist's defense. He was claiming that his sin and his cover-up were actually an act of fatherly love. Faith stepped forward then. Her voice was small, but it filled the room. She said, "You didn't do it for them. You did it for your image. You paid $20 million to make sure I never called you Dad. You paid for my silence, but you forgot one thing. You can't buy a daughter's soul." My father finally looked at her, and for a split second, I saw a flash of regret in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by the cold, calculating look of a businessman. He realized the threat wasn't just standing in his kitchen. She was speaking the truth in his own house. The confrontation took a dark turn when my father's lead attorney stepped into the room. He handed me a folder. He said, "Jessa, your father has authorized me to show you this. If you go public with this story, we will release a series of documents regarding your own husband's business dealings and Jill's private records. We have spent decades collecting insurance on everyone in this family. If you sink this ship, Jessa, you're going down with us." My father stood there, nodding slowly. He was threatening to destroy his other children to protect his secret one. It was the lowest point of my life. I realized my father didn't just have a trust fund for Faith. He had a dirt file on every single one of us. He had been recording our conversations, tracking our finances, and waiting for the day we might rebel. The $20 million wasn't the only weapon he had. He had turned our family into an intelligence agency where love was replaced by leverage. I looked at the big house around me, the high ceilings, the expensive furniture, and I realized it was all built on a foundation of blackmail. I took the folder from the lawyer's hand and, without looking at it, I walked over to the industrial shredder we used for fan mail. I dropped the folder in and watched it turn to dust. I looked at my father and said, You can try to destroy us, Papa, but you can't shred the truth. Faith is staying with me. And tomorrow morning, we are sitting down with a national news network to tell them about the $20 million, the shadow ministry, and the sister you tried to erase. I walked out of that house with Faith, leaving my father standing in the middle of his empty, expensive kitchen. As we drove away, I didn't look back. The big house was finally small in my rearview mirror. The morning after we left the big house, the world felt different. We sat in a quiet studio, the red on-air light glowing like a beacon. As I looked at Faith sitting next to me, no longer a secret, no longer a subject F, I realized that $20 million could buy a lot of things, but it couldn't buy the peace of a clear conscience. When the interviewer asked me why I risked my inheritance and my family's reputation to tell this story, I didn't think about the money. I thought about the 30 years of birthdays my sister spent alone. I thought about the truth that sets us free. The reaction from the public was a tidal wave. Thousands of women, many who had followed our family for decades, reached out. They didn't care about the scandal. They cared about the girl. They saw their own daughters, their own sisters, in Faith's eyes. My father's lawyers tried to issue a statement calling it a private family healing process, but the damage was done. The facade of the perfect Duggar family hadn't just cracked, it had shattered. And in its place, something real was starting to grow. Faith is living with us now. She's getting to know her nieces and nephews. Every time I see her playing with my children, I feel a sting of sadness for the years we lost, but a rush of joy for the years we have ahead. My father still hasn't called her. The trust fund has been frozen in a legal battle that might take years to settle. But as Faith told me yesterday, Jessa, I've spent my whole life with millions in a bank account I couldn't touch, and I was miserable. Today I have nothing but a seat at your table, and I've never been richer. This journey has cost me a lot. I don't know if I'll ever be invited back to the big house. I don't know if my brothers will ever forgive me for breaking the silence. But I know this. I can look my children in the eye and tell them that their mother stood for what was right, even when it was expensive. The 20 million secret is out. The 20th child is home. And for the first time in my life, I'm not just a character in a television show. I'm a sister. Thank you for walking this dark road with me. Thank you for listening when the world tried to drown out the truth. If there is a Faith in your family, someone hidden, someone hurt, someone silenced, don't wait for a trust fund to break. Speak the truth now, because at the end of the day, family isn't about the name you carry. It's about the love you refuse to hide. I'm Jessa Seawald, and this is just the beginning of our new story. Good night, and God bless.